How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Rocky Mountain EDC channel. Today for you guys, I have another Versus Series video. If you don't know already, I have a Versus Series playlist on the channel where I take a head-to-head of knives within company and between company knives and match them up and look at some of their properties to see what those comparisons look like and which knife is best. It's important to keep in mind with these Versus series that I look at knives that are similar in both price, purpose, and their overall function. So in this case for today, we have the Benchmade Bugout versus the WE Knives Banter. Now, both of these knives are EDC inclined, but they're also very similar in terms of all of their characteristics. What type of population are they targeting, right? So you're never going to see in these Versus videos a heavy-duty bushcraft knife or some type of fixed blade going up in a Versus series against, let's say, a slip joint or a friction folder or even an EDC knife, right? Their function and purpose is different. So to try to keep things fair, I am doing it in this style. So if you like that, great. If you don't, sorry, you can go make your own Versus video where you compare slip joints to fixed blades, but not in this Versus video. So today we're going to be looking at some of the characteristics of these popular knives. Some of those categories that we're going to be scoring on is the steel type, the ergonomics, the lock type, handle material, blade shape, the weight of the knife, pocket carry, deployment, price, and lastly, the best thing that knives and these cutting objects do is cutting and slicing. So then we're going to total those up and see which one wins. Now, this is kind of going to be as objective as I can. So I'm trying to make this not subjective. There is going to be some level of bias and personal opinion, but I'm going to try to do my best to leave as much of that out and try to think about it coming from the common consumer or the common user. But just keep in mind, whatever knife you like better, if the knife that you like on the table does not win in the Versus series, that's okay. I like both of these knives. I think both of these knives are great. I think both of these knives have pros and cons. So just keep that in mind. You're free to enjoy and like whatever knife it is that you enjoy. So before we get started in the Versus series, please, if you end up liking this video, subscribe to the Rocky Mountain EDC channel and give this video a thumbs up. It definitely helps out the channel a lot. All right, so first thing on the table for the Versus video is the steel type. Now, it is important to keep in mind that both of these versions of the knives are not the quote-unquote vanilla base version of the model. So this is the micarta version of the WE Banter, so it has the micarta scales. Everything else is pretty much the same in terms of what you're going to get from the very base or the standard model of the knife, okay? Same thing with the Bugout here. This is the CF Elite. So same thing, except this is going to be their sturdier diamond or carbon infused CF Elite handle material, which is supposed to be a little stronger than their normal FRN or whatever type of plastic composite they have on the standard Bugout. So all of the other characteristics are the same other than the handle scales in terms of the base model comparison. So we're going to try to keep it looking at it from the base models, but nonetheless, I don't think that those handle material changes for either knife really make that big of a difference. But I am going to try to think of it from the stock or the base model. So let's keep that in mind. All right, so for the steel, we have two very similar steel types. You can see on the WE Banter here, kind of hidden there. But we have CPM S35VN, and then we have CPM S30V on the Bugout. Okay, so very comparable steels made by the same steel manufacturer, Crucible Industries. So that's going to be good in terms of that comparison. And S30V and S35EN, they're very similar. Okay, S35EN is supposed to be just a little bit more enhanced in terms of some of the corrosion resistance properties. Now, both of these knives are coated, so I wouldn't be overly concerned about the corrosion. And S30V and S35EN are very similar in terms of their performance, other than the little bit of added corrosion resistance and maybe even a little toughness in the S35EN. So this one's kind of, it's up in the air. I've used both steels, and from my personal use, so this is where personal opinion comes in. Both of these steels perform almost identically. I haven't had any noticeable differences between either of those steel types, so this one's actually going to be a tie in the steel category. I know if you're upset that S35EN didn't win over S30V, sorry. There's just really not that big of a difference. Both of these steels are great for EDC. They're very well rounded. They're going to be good in edge retention, toughness, sharpenability, and corrosion resistance. So keeping that in mind, I personally think through use, both of these steels are just as good. Not much of a difference, in my opinion. All right, so moving on to the ergonomics. Now, this one's kind of interesting. In both of these knives, we have almost a very similar type of profile in terms of the handle itself. They're kind of blocky. They kind of have these interestingly squared, but kind of contoured and kind of chamfered off edges on the top and the bottom of the knives, very similar. The only difference, really, other than obviously the handle material, is the length and the thickness of those two handles. So the WE Knives Banter is going to be obviously a much shorter handle. It's going to be a little wider, and it's a little blockier compared to the Benchmade Bugout. Now, the Benchmade Bugout, these scales are by no means, the most contoured scales that you have, but they do have a little bit more of shape to them and texturing and some different characteristics there. But they're very similar in their overall design. The WE Knives Banter, obviously much shorter. Putting my entire hand on this covers up the entire knife. It is comfortable. By no means do I feel like I am cramped on space, but it is filled out to the max for sure. On the Benchmade Bugout, I definitely have a little extra room. I can kind of move my hand down if I want. I can, change my grip up a little bit more. I feel like I have a little bit more knife in terms of the handle to work with. And the micarta is very texturally different. It's kind of smooth, but under wet conditions, it actually is a little bit more grippy. So this one's kind of tough, but I feel that the blockiness and the shorter amount of handle that you're given on the WE Knives Banter just affects the ergonomics a little bit. It's a little blocky. It's a little chunky in terms of its size, right? For its size, it's a little chunky and blocky. And the pocket clip does kind of create a hot spot. I did notice that with use. It creates a hot spot where I don't really feel it on the Benchmade Bugout. I don't feel that pocket clip at all. And I just feel like the extra added length in the handle just makes it a little bit more comfortable. So as far as ergonomics go, I'm going to give it to the Benchmade Bugout. All right, next up is lock type. I think this one's kind of a clear winner, in my opinion. We have the liner lock on the Banter, and then we have the axis lock on the Bugout. Now, say what you want about the axis lock. It is definitely not the most perfect lock, and I would argue that no lock is perfect on a folding pocket knife. But when this lock works, and the Omega springs don't break. This is an outstanding lock. It's super strong, super durable, super reliable, and it offers another way to open up the knife and to safely close the knife as well when everything goes right and those Omega springs stay intact. Now, I have some aftermarket Omega springs on here, and they have been working fantastic, and they really let the Axis lock shine. So I think that the design, the overall strength, when everything functions right, it's just a better lock. It just offers a lot more variety. I feel a lot more confident with it. Not to say that liner locks aren't great. I mean, I think the Wee Knives Banter does a great liner lock. It's relatively thick. I don't really like to see these really thin, wimpy liner locks. You know, you're expecting this piece of metal that pulls out in front of the tang of the blade to stop it from closing. You don't want that piece of metal warping. So even though it's not a bad lock, it's great, it's reliable, it's not as easy in terms of manipulation, so closing it. I would say and argue that it's not as strong as the Axis lock. And you do have to possibly risk having your hand in the path of the blade. So I just feel that the Axis lock is going to have to win on this category for the Benchmade Bugout. So lock type goes to the Bugout. All right, next up is handle material. This one's kind of interesting because we have very different handle materials. We have a very organic material in terms of the micarta versus this CF Elite, you know, carbon fiber infused plastic, whatever it is, right? I personally love the feel of micarta. It feels natural. It's comfortable. It actually does offer a little bit of grip, but it's not aggressive. So this doesn't tear up my pocket. It's a really nice handle material. I really enjoy it. Not to say that in terms of the quality or the strength of the CF Elite handle, it just doesn't have that feel. I mean, there's some texturing, there's some added stuff to this, but it just still doesn't feel as good in the hand in terms of the texturing, right? The handle material. Now, when we talked about ergonomics, obviously this one won due to the handle length, but as far as the material goes, it just doesn't feel as good. It's not really as grippy as you would like. And even though this diamond texturing in the middle here would offer some type of grip, it does actually tear up the pocket a little bit over time. Whereas this is very fine texturing to give you that grip, and it doesn't tear up the pocket. So I'm gonna have to give the Wee Knives Banter the win on the handle material, at least in this case. If we want to even think about the standard stock version of the G10 handle, I still think G10 is a way better handle material than the CF Elite in terms of this fiber reinforced nylon. I just feel that G10 is a much better upgrade. So even if you want to compare the G10 version to the stock FRN handles, whatever they use on the Bugout, I still think it wins. So in this case, the Banter wins in this model or the standard stock model. All right, so blade shape. Both of these knives have a drop point blade shape. You could argue that the Banter has technically a spear point because both the edge and the spine of the blade almost come to a perfectly even point to the tip where they follow or mirror each other. You could argue that's a spear point. I would say it's a spear point / drop point. For me, I consider a spear point when you actually have the purpose of the knife being an edged on this side. Because again, the profile is for one cutting edge. Thicker at the spine, it tapers down to the cutting edge, right? So I would consider that a drop point in my opinion. This is obviously a very standard drop point. And as far as the overall shape, both of these knives offer a really good central point to the pivot of the knife. They offer just a little bit of belly and a little bit of flat. So these are great for a lot of unique tasks that you're going to need to do. They're great for EDC, very well rounded. This is going to be a tie for me. The blade shapes are too similar, and they're too similar in their overall purpose. And from the use of both knives, I would argue that they function about the same in terms of similar cutting tasks due to the blade shape. Now, we'll talk about cutting and slicing and some of the thickness behind the edge here in a little bit. But that's going to be a tie. All right, so let's talk about weight. The Banter weighs in at about 2 ounces, while the Bugout weighs in at 1.8 ounces. Now, considering what you get in both of these knives, we have the Banter, which comes in at a little bit less of a blade length than the Bugout. Yet the Bugout also offers a much larger handle in terms of the length. I would just say that based upon the amount of knife that you get, both in handle and blade, for a 0.2 ounce difference, I would say the Bugout wins in that weight category. Not to say that the Banter is a heavy knife. It is by no means a heavy knife. But considering the reduced size in the handle and the reduced blade length, I'm going to have to give it to the Bugout. And again, that's kind of the Bugout's big thing, right? It's a full-size knife for a very light weight. So the weight is going to have to be given to the Bugout. All right, so as far as pocket carry goes, both these knives are very low profile in terms of offering a deep carry pocket clip. Both of these pocket clips work fantastic. They're easy to slide in and out of the pocket. Good retention on both of the clips. And they're both deep carry. So as far as pocket carry goes, both of these knives are pretty small. They're both light. I would say that they equally carry just as well in the pocket. If I had to pick which one carried the best, it would have to be the Bugout, without a doubt, in terms of that pocket carry. And that's really due to just being a little bit more slim at this point. So if you can kind of tell, the Bugout's just a little slimmer in its profile than the Banter. And this actually sits in the pocket really nice, and you really don't notice it. It doesn't really get in the way that much. So I'm going to have to give pocket carry to the Bugout. All right, let's talk about deployment. Okay, so obviously the Bugout is going to be relying on the axis lock, that axis crossbar, kind of acting as the detent. So you don't really get a really snappy deployment of the knife. It can be mushy. Depending on how you adjust the pivot or mess with the pivot, you can get a more snappy action. You can get a much more mushy action. It does feel good on a slow rollout, which is nice. I do like that. I don't always want to have to flick my knife blade open, right? If you're in a place or an environment where you just need to be very discreet and just roll it out, the Bugout rolls out very, very nicely. As far as deployment on the Banter, I would say it has the snappiest action. I cannot fail this knife when it breaks that detent ball. So it's very good on that fast deployment, which is really nice, both in the reverse flick. It has a good, sure deployment. Now, because of that stronger detent ball, this is not as comfortable to slow roll out. So if you kind of want to try to slow roll it, you kind of have to really push a lot of pressure, and you kind of have to control it, and you do feel that break, and then you control it out. So it's not as smooth on that controlled rollout as the Bugout, right? So really, in terms of deployment, both of these knives are excellent. But when it comes to the surety of the deployment, the consistency of the deployment, I'm going to have to give it to the WE Knives Banter. And again, it's really due to that true detent ball, and it does run on caged ball bearings in the pivot, so it is very smooth, and it just opens every time. Like, you're not going to fail this knife when you want to open it. So I'm going to have to give the deployment to the Banter. All right, price. If you know anything about Benchmade, is that they have some of the most outrageous prices on pocket knives. And considering both of these knives are very similar, we're going to look at the price difference. The Banter for MSRP is running around $130. Retail right now ranges between $97 and $100 for the Banter. The Bugout MSRP runs between $180 and $190. Retail for the Bugout goes between $160 and $170. Considering the similarity in these knives, the handle material, the handle shape, the blade shape, similarity in terms of the weight, the win in price has to go to the Banter. It is just for the knife, for what you're getting compared to the Bugout. It's very similar at a much more reasonable price. The Banter is going to have to win. All right, cutting and slicing. This one is very unique because, again, they have very similar blade shapes. When we look at the thickness behind the edge, they are very similar. The Bugout is a little thinner behind the edge. But when we look at the height from edge to spine, the Banter is actually a little bit more of a wider blade. And this wider blade, this height from the blade edge to the spine, actually makes it cut really nicely through materials like cardboard. So, just to kind of demonstrate a little bit, this cuts through cardboard very nicely. Now, the Bugout also cuts through nicely as well. So they both cut through cardboard very similarly. A little bit more of a narrow blade in terms of edge to spine, so less height. It is thinner in profile. Banter, a little thicker, consistent across, but that taller edge to spine actually makes it cut through material very nicely because you can get down to a much thinner point behind the edge. And that's really what matters, is that thickness behind the edge. And just that small difference, I would have to say that the overall slicing, because both of these are going to cut very similarly, the overall slicing capability, I'm going to have to give to the Banter. So the Banter wins in the slicing and cutting category. All right, so that is it for all the categories that we're looking at for these two knives. So I'm going to tally these up and we're going to see which one wins in the Versus series. And it is a tie. This is pretty interesting in terms of looking at both the knives. They're very similar. This is the first tie in the Versus series. And again, I do this in the moment. I don't have a pre-planned idea of which knife is going to win. This is based upon how I feel in the moment. So this is a tie. So rather than me deciding the tie breaker, why don't you guys in the comment list which knife you think is better? And whatever knife has the most comments for which one is the better knife, I will consider that knife the winner of the Versus series. So leave a comment on which knife you think truly wins in this Versus series due to this tie. This is pretty fun. So leave that comment. Let me know what you guys think. It really does help if you guys give a like to the video, as it kind of gives me an idea of what you guys enjoy. It also helps YouTube recommend my videos to other individuals as well. So thanks again for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Have a good day.